Elijah Croft was 39 years old, and for 11 years he had been the kind of man people looked through on their way to finding someone more interesting. He drove a 9-year-old Buick with a parking sticker from the water treatment plant where he worked as a senior systems analyst. He wore the same 3 pairs of slacks in rotation. He brought his lunch in a blue insulated bag that his mother had given him 4 Christmases ago, and he had never seen any reason to replace. Vanessa's friends called him the quiet one, said it the way people say dependable. Technically, a compliment. Functionally, a dismissal. And Vanessa had stopped objecting sometime around year 6. She filed on a Thursday morning, certified mail, through an attorney whose office was on the 12th floor of a building downtown. The papers arrived at the house while Elijah was already at the Lottery Commission office on the other side of the city, sitting across from a man in a gray suit who was explaining in careful language what happens when a ticket worth $840 million is presented for verification. She had filed before the ink was dry on the verification form. She had been planning it for 8 months. She had no idea he had known about the plan for 6. What Vanessa did not know, what her attorney did not know, what the man she had been meeting in the Marriott on Riverside for 8 months did not know, was that Elijah had structured everything 3 years ago, quietly and correctly, in a way that meant the number on that verification form belonged entirely to one person. What happened in the weeks that followed would settle every question she thought she had already answered. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning started the way Elijah's mornings always started. 5:45. The house still dark, the coffee already set on a timer, because he had read once that small efficiencies compounded over a lifetime, and he had never stopped believing that. He sat at the kitchen table with the mug in both hands and let the quiet of the house settle around him. Cincinnati in January had a particular quality of stillness before the day assembled itself, the cold holding everything in place, the street outside motionless, the only sound the furnace cycling on and then off again in the basement. He had replaced the furnace himself 3 winters ago. Not because they couldn't afford a technician, but because he understood mechanical systems in the way some people understand language, intuitively, at the level of structure. And the work of doing it himself produced a satisfaction that paying for it could not. The crawl space where he'd run the new duct lines still had the pencil marks he'd made measuring clearances. He noticed them every time he went down there to check the filter. His mother had been a systems analyst before him. Water quality, not lottery. But the discipline was the same. You tracked inputs, you tracked outputs, you identified variances before they became failures. She had raised him alone after his father left, in a small house in Avondale that she had kept in precise order because, she told him once, disorder costs more than people think. She had said it once and never repeated it, because she was a woman who believed you listened the first time. She had been gone 4 years now. The blue insulated lunch bag she had given him sat on the counter by the door, and he used it every day, because that was how he honored the people who shaped him. He had met Vanessa at a community board meeting 11 years ago. She was presenting a neighborhood beautification proposal. He was there representing the utility on a drainage issue. And she had caught his eye across the folding table with a specific confidence of a person who was used to being the most prepared person in the room. He had admired that. He had called her 2 weeks later. They had married inside 2 years, bought the house on Ferris, and for a while, the life they were building had the quality of something real and intended. She worked in commercial real estate. She was good at it. She was social in the way that his profession did not require him to be, and for a long time he had understood their differences as complementary. He tracked the systems. She moved through the world. Between those two things, they had constructed something that functioned. He noticed the change before he could name it. A coolness in small things, the way she answered questions, the new angle of her phone when she texted. The Tuesday evenings that became Thursday evenings, that became a pattern he filed without deciding to. He was a systems analyst. He noticed variances. That was not a choice. It was a discipline. On the counter near the coffee maker was a scratch ticket, the remains of a habit he'd maintained since his 20s. He bought one a week, never more. He scratched it each morning with the same coin, a 1972 quarter his grandfather had given him. He had won $40 once, 3 years ago. He had used it to buy a new level for the toolbox. He had not yet told Vanessa about the other ticket, the one he had purchased 6 days ago from the gas station on Madison, alone, on a Tuesday afternoon when he had stopped for coffee and found himself standing at the display and making a decision he could not fully account for. He had taken the ticket home and scratched it in the garage and sat very still for approximately 4 minutes. Then he had driven to his brother's house and asked him to read the numbers aloud, because he needed a second set of eyes. The numbers were correct. He had said nothing to Vanessa. He had called a lawyer that evening. He had begun to understand what the timing might mean, and he had begun to plan with the same methodical care he brought to all things that mattered. The front door closed at 7:15. Vanessa, already dressed for showings, kissed his cheek at a distance that had been incrementally increasing for months and said she'd be home late and did not look back. He listened to her car back out of the driveway. He sat with his coffee for another full minute. He was watching. He had been watching for some time. The discovery, in its final form, arrived through a record he had not gone looking for. Elijah's cousin worked in title insurance. Not investigatively, she processed documents, reviewed chains, flagged discrepancies. Her name was Lorraine, and she was 44 years old, and she had known Elijah since they were children, and she did not offer information that wasn't hers to offer. She had called him 6 months ago on a Saturday morning and said, "I need to tell you something I saw, and I need you to understand I'm not saying it to cause trouble." He had said, "Tell me." A deed had crossed her desk. A condominium in Covington, Kentucky, across the river, 15 minutes from their house. The deed was in Vanessa's name alone. Purchase price, $460,000. She had asked Lorraine to run the title work, which was either brazen or careless, and Lorraine had concluded it was both. Lorraine had also noted the date of purchase, 14 months prior, funded through a wire from an account Elijah did not recognize. He had thanked Lorraine and told her she had done the right thing. He did not confront Vanessa. He went to the garage and sat on the stool beside the workbench and thought about the inputs and outputs of the situation with the same systematic attention he brought to water quality anomalies. A property purchased alone, funded from an unknown account, 14 months prior. He pulled their shared financial records going back 2 years. He found the account, a savings account opened in Vanessa's name alone, funded by transfers from her business income that had been routed through her corporate account before he had access to track them. The total in that account, as of the most recent statement he could access, was $212,000. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He photographed every document and created a folder on his encrypted laptop. He named it Documentation. Then he called Gerald Tatum, a civil and family law attorney his mother had used for her estate, and whom Elijah had retained quietly 6 months ago, before the ticket, when the variances had become a pattern he could no longer file as inconclusive. Gerald was 62, unhurried, and spoke with the measured precision of a man who had learned that the person who says the most in a legal situation usually comes out the worst. He had reviewed the documentation Elijah provided and said, the hidden account is dissipation of marital assets. The Covington property is a more complex question. It may be marital property depending on the source of funds, and that source is traceable. He had paused and said, "Who is she meeting there?" "A man named Derek Coles," Elijah said. "He's a developer. They met at an industry event 2 years ago." Gerald had written the name down. He said, "I'll need 3 weeks." "Take whatever you need," Elijah said. That had been 5 months before the ticket. He had spent those months building the case the way he built everything, layer by layer, with attention to what was load-bearing and what was decorative. Gerald had assembled the financial trail with the help of a forensic accountant named Patricia Voss, who had the manner of a person who had ceased being surprised by human behavior sometime in her early career, and now approached it with the same neutrality she brought to spreadsheets. Patricia found the Covington condo's funding source traced back 22 months. She found a second property, a smaller one, a townhouse in Hyde Park, that had been purchased under an LLC Vanessa had registered 2 years ago under a business name Elijah had never heard of. She found 14 months of documented meetings, cross-referenced with the property's access log through a management company that kept electronic records. Total dissipation of marital assets, Patricia calculated, $640,000, moved in increments designed to avoid triggering automatic alerts. Elijah had reviewed the summary on a Wednesday evening in Gerald's conference room and sat with it in silence for a moment. Then he said, "And the lottery." Gerald said, "The lottery is the most important piece of all of this." He leaned forward. "When did you buy the ticket?" Elijah gave the date. Gerald said, "She filed today." He set his pen down. "Elijah, in Ohio, lottery winnings purchased during a marriage are typically considered marital property. That is the standard rule. But there is an exception, and it is not a small one. If the marriage was already functionally dissolved, if one party had taken deliberate steps toward separation, including consulting counsel, opening separate accounts, or—" Gerald looked at him steadily, filing for divorce prior to the win, then the argument for separate property gained significant weight. "She filed this morning," Elijah said. Gerald said, "She filed this morning. The ticket was purchased 6 days ago, while the marriage was still legally intact. That is the argument her attorney will make." "And our argument?" Gerald said. "Our argument is that $640,000 in hidden assets, 2 secret properties, and 22 months of calculated financial deception constitute grounds for the court to treat this marriage as having been functionally severed long before today's filing date. We will also argue that her filing this morning, without knowledge of the win, is evidence of bad faith. She did not file to protect herself from the lottery. She filed as part of a plan already in motion, and the timing is coincidence working in our favor rather than against it." Elijah looked at the window. He said, "What is the realistic outcome?" Gerald said, "I don't give guarantees. What I give is probability and preparation. In this jurisdiction, with this documentation, with a judge who has seen financial misconduct before, I believe the equitable outcome is a division that reflects the misconduct. The hidden assets will be counted against her share. The lottery will fight for the largest possible portion. I think we can protect the majority of it." Elijah said, "I'm not interested in punishing her. I'm interested in accuracy." Gerald looked at him for a moment. He said, "That is the most useful thing a client has ever said to me." He drove from Gerald's office to his brother Marcus's house in Blue Ash. Marcus was 43, a former electrician now running his own contracting firm, and he was the person who had read the lottery numbers aloud in the garage 6 days ago, and then sat down on a paint bucket and said nothing for a full minute. He had kept the secret with the ease of a man who understood that some information had its own proper time. Elijah sat at Marcus's kitchen table and told him everything in the order it had happened. Marcus listened with a stillness that was its own kind of response. When Elijah finished, Marcus said, "She filed the same morning." "Same morning," Elijah said. Marcus was quiet. He poured 2 glasses of water and pushed one across the table and said, "What do you need from me?" "I need you to know where I am with it," Elijah said. "And I need you to know I'm all right." Marcus looked at him. "You sure?" He thought about the question with the care it deserved. He said, "I've known what this was for 6 months. The ticket changed the number. It didn't change the situation." Marcus nodded. He said, "You know what Pop used to say about pressure." Elijah said, "Systems don't fail under pressure. They fail because of flaws that pressure reveals." Marcus said, "She didn't create the flaw. She just found it." They sat with that for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the January afternoon was going gray and still, and Elijah drank his water and thought about his mother's voice saying disorder costs more than people think. And he thought she was right about that in ways she might not have anticipated. For the next 2 weeks, he performed his ordinary life with the precision of a man who had already made his decisions and saw no reason to announce them prematurely. He went to work. He came home. He ate dinner with Vanessa on 3 evenings during that period, and she ate with the careful composure of a woman who had filed for divorce and was waiting to see what happened next. And he ate with the composed attention of a man who knew more than she expected and was waiting for the right room to demonstrate it. They talked about the weather. They talked about a pipe fitting issue in the downstairs bathroom that he had been meaning to address for 2 weeks. They did not talk about the certified mail. She did not mention having sent it. He fixed the pipe fitting on a Thursday evening, alone in the basement with his tools, because it needed doing, and he was the kind of man who finished what required finishing. Patience is not passive. It is the active discipline of not moving until the moment is correct. The mediation session was held in a conference room on the 9th floor of a building near the courthouse, the kind of room designed to feel neutral and to accomplish nothing of the kind. A mediator named Howard sat at the head of the table. Gerald sat to Elijah's right. Vanessa's attorney, a woman named Diane Marsh, who had a reputation Gerald respected and had warned Elijah about, sat to Vanessa's left. Vanessa came in composed. She had dressed carefully, and her expression had the managed quality of someone who had prepared for several possible versions of the meeting. She looked at Elijah with a warmth that was not quite real and not quite false, and occupied the difficult territory between them. Diane Marsh opened by describing her client's position: 11 years of marriage, joint contribution to the marital estate, and the lottery win, occurring during the marriage and therefore subject to equitable distribution as the central asset for division. Gerald let her finish. Then he opened a folder and placed the first document on the table. He said, "This is a record of account activity from a savings account maintained by Mrs. Vanessa Cole, opened 22 months ago without disclosure to her husband, and funded by $212,000 derived from marital income." He placed the second document. He said, "This is the deed to a condominium in Covington, Kentucky, purchased 14 months ago by Mrs. Cole, using funds from that account, without disclosure to her husband." He placed the third. He said, "This is the deed to a townhouse in Hyde Park, purchased 20 months ago through an LLC registered in Mrs. Cole's name under a business identity her husband was unaware of." He placed the fourth, Patricia Voss's forensic accounting summary. He said, "This is an analysis prepared by a certified forensic accountant documenting $640,000 in systematic financial dissipation from the marital estate over the preceding 22 months. The room was very quiet. Diane Marsh looked at her client. Vanessa's expression had not collapsed. It had reorganized into something careful and contained. She was a composed person, and she remained composed. And Elijah noted that and felt something close to respect for it, even as he registered what it meant. She had known this was possible. She had not known how much he had. Gerald said, "We will be arguing before the court that the pattern of financial misconduct constitutes a deliberate and calculated dismantling of the marital estate, which under Ohio law is a substantial factor in equitable distribution. We will further argue that the lottery asset, purchased 6 days prior to today's filing and in the context of a marriage that had been functionally severed by Mrs. Cole's own conduct, should be classified accordingly." Diane Marsh said, "The win occurred during the marriage. That is the law." Gerald said, "Equitable distribution accounts for misconduct. The law is also that." Elijah looked at Vanessa across the table. He said, quietly and without unkindness, "I'm not asking for anything that isn't accurate, Vanessa. That's all I have ever asked for from you." She looked at him. For a moment, a brief unguarded moment, her composure shifted, and what showed underneath it was not guilt exactly, but the specific sadness of someone who understands. Too late. The precise cost of a series of choices they made with deliberate care. She said nothing. He did not need her to. He gathered his documents and nodded to Gerald, and they walked out into the hallway where the fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent hum, and the elevator doors were already open, and he stepped in and let the doors close behind him, and did not look back, because there was nothing in that room he needed to see again. He was clear. He had been clear for 6 months. The number had changed. The clarity had not. 14 months later, Elijah sat on the back porch of a house in Hyde Park. Not the townhouse from the LLC, which had been returned to the marital estate and sold as part of the settlement, but a different house, older, a brick 2-story, with a yard that backed up to a line of oaks that had been there longer than anyone currently living could remember. He had bought it in the spring and spent the summer doing the work it needed: new windows, refinished floors, a back porch he built from scratch with cedar he had milled himself at a shop in Norwood, because the work of building something by hand was the best thinking he knew. The settlement had resolved in March. 8 months after mediation, the court had applied the misconduct finding substantially. The lottery award, after legal argument that Gerald described as some of the finest he had prepared in 30 years of practice, had been divided 83-17 in Elijah's favor. The 2 secret properties had been valued, added to the marital estate, and their assessed equivalent deducted from Vanessa's share before distribution. What remained for her was the house on Ferris, the joint retirement accounts, and a number Gerald described as fair given the circumstances: $840 million, gross, after taxes and legal fees. A number that Elijah had chosen not to discuss publicly, and that he had placed in the care of a wealth management firm Gerald recommended, and a trust structure he had spent 2 months reviewing before signing. He had established a foundation in his mother's name, focused on systems infrastructure in underserved municipal water districts. He had funded it with $12 million in the first year. 3 cities had already reached out. He had not changed his car. He was getting to that. There was a woman named Celeste on the porch with him, drinking tea. She was a civil engineer, 40, and she had come into his life through the foundation work. She had applied to consult on the first water district project, and he had met her in a site visit, and she had asked 4 technical questions in the first 10 minutes that told him she understood systems at the level he understood them. They had been careful with each other in the way that people who have been through damage are careful, attentively, without haste, with a respect for the other person's architecture. He heard through Lorraine, who heard through the title network, that Vanessa had relocated, that Derek Coles had moved to a smaller market after 2 of his developments ran into financing problems that stemmed from a forensic audit connected to an unrelated civil matter, but which had surfaced, as forensic audits tend to surface, more than the original question had asked about. He registered this information the way he registered all variance data, noted, cataloged, no longer requiring action. The oaks at the back of the yard held their bare winter branches against the February sky, and Celeste said something about the way the light came through them, and he looked and saw it. The particular quality of late afternoon winter light through bare branches, which was one of the things that repaid looking at closely. He had a mug in both hands, the same way he had always held his coffee. Some things did not need to change. His mother had told him once, a system that is built right will tell you when something is wrong. The skill is learning to listen before the failure, not after. He had listened. He had documented. He had waited for the right moment and moved with precision when it came. He was free. He was solvent. He was, in the specific and durable sense of the word, unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like. vidIQ Sonnet 4.6 High.